The map you grew up with. The one on your classroom wall. The one on your phone right now is mathematically incapable of telling you the truth. Not like, oh, it's a little off. I mean, structurally, fundamentally by the laws of geometry. It can't show you reality without lying about something. And the crazy part, we all just agreed to use it anyway. Okay, so here's what this video is actually about. The world map most people trust is wrong. Not in one way. In three separate, compounding, deeply annoying ways. It lies about size. It lies about direction. And it lies about what's even a natural fact versus what's a choice someone made in the 1500s that we just never questioned. And then some of those map lies got so embedded into how countries were drawn, into where borders were placed, that they're now legally binding reality. The lie became the truth. We're going to talk about all of it. I promise we'll get to the genuinely insane stuff. A fictional mountain range that shaped exploration for a century. A fake town that became real. And a map error that survived into Google Earth until a ship sailed through where the island was supposed to be. But first, we need to talk about Mercator and why he technically ruined your sense of reality. So here's the problem with maps. And it's not a mistake anyone made, it's just physics. The Earth is a sphere. Maps are flat, and you cannot flatten a sphere without breaking something. It's like, you know how if you try to wrap a basketball on flat paper, you get all these creases and tears? That's the problem. The paper isn't wrong. The sphere just doesn't flatten neatly. So every flat map has to make a choice. What do you preserve? Area, shape, distance, direction. You can only keep some of them. You cannot keep all of them. This is not an opinion, this is math. And the map we all grew up with, the Mercator projection, made its choice a long time ago. In 1569, Dorada's Mercator made a map for sailors, and it was genuinely brilliant for that. The trick was, it preserved angles. So if you're navigating the ocean with a compass, your route shows up as a straight line on the map. For a sailor in 1569, that's incredible. You don't have to do complex math. You just draw a line and follow your compass. The cost? Area gets completely destroyed near the poles. And not mildly. Not, Greenland looks slightly large. I mean, here are the actual numbers. At 60 degrees latitude, that's like Scandinavia, land area is inflated by 4 times. At 75 degrees, nearly 15 times. At 80 degrees, 33 times the real size. 33 times. So let's talk about Greenland versus Africa, because this is the one that breaks people. On a Mercator-style map, which is what most people have in their heads, Greenland and Africa look roughly comparable. Maybe Greenland's a little smaller. The real numbers, Africa is about 30 million square kilometers. Greenland is about 2 million square kilometers. Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland. 14 times. But your brain, trained since kindergarten on Mercator maps, looked at them side by side and went, yeah, seems about right. That's the map working as designed, just not for the purpose of understanding the actual size of places. Now okay, you might say, but surely someone fixed this. Kind of. Not really. Let me explain why. There's something called the Gall-Peters projection, which corrects the area problem. Africa looks the right size, but to do that, it has to stretch everything vertically, so now all the shapes are wrong. Everyone looks like they got squished by a giant. There's the Winkel triple, which became the National Geographic standard, and it's pretty good. It's wrong about area and shape, just less catastrophically than the others. And then there's Web Mercator, which is the map on your phone. Right now, Google Maps, Apple Maps, every navigation app. It's optimized for loading fast on a phone screen, not for geographic accuracy. The map you use every single day to navigate your actual life is built on a projection designed for 16th century ocean sailors. We just never changed it. And hey, if you're the kind of person who enjoys finding out that things you trusted your entire life were quietly broken, you're going to like the rest of this video a lot. Hit like, subscribe if you haven't, it genuinely helps. And then let's keep going, because the size thing is actually the least weird part. Okay, but here's the one that messes with people even more than the size thing. Straight lines on a map are not the shortest route between two places. I know, but stay with me. Paris to Vancouver. Imagine you're flying that route. You look at a flat map and you think, okay, I'll go west. Straight line, right across the Atlantic, right, wrong. The actual shortest route bends north, way north, over Greenland, over northern Canada. It's an arc that looks absurd on a flat map. The reason is that Earth is a sphere, and the shortest path between 2 points on a sphere isn't a flat straight line. It's called a great circle arc, and it bends toward the poles. So the straight line your brain draws on a Mercator map, not straight, not even close. Your intuition about direction, about where things are relative to each other, was trained by a map that literally cannot represent those relationships correctly. Every time you picture the world in your head, you're probably picturing a Mercator map, and that picture is wrong. Which brings me to something even more fundamental. Something so basic, so obvious that it's going to sound stupid, until you realize it's actually kind of profound. Why is north up? No, genuinely. Why? Like, you know that in space, there's no up, right? Earth is just floating. There's no cosmic arrow pointing north. North being at the top of maps is not a law of physics. It's not a rule of geography. It's a habit. A historical convention that got locked in. And it got locked in because European cartographers, who had a lot of power over what maps looked like, put themselves at the top. Their hemisphere, their framing. In 1979, a guy named Stuart Mercator published what he called the Universal Corrective Map of the World. It was a south-up map. Australia at the top, Antarctica front and center. It was a joke, it was a provocation, but it's also just equally valid. Like, there is no physical reason north should be up. None. It's purely convention. And when you see a south-up map for the first time, your brain rejects it. It feels wrong. But the only reason it feels wrong is because you've been trained, since you were a child, to see the world one specific way. That's not geography. That's ideology. Okay, we've established that the map lies about size. It lies about direction. It lies about which way is up. Now let's talk about the borders, because this is where it gets genuinely dark. Here's the thing about political borders on a map. They look so clean, so inevitable. Like the countries were always shaped that way, like the lines followed some natural logic. Rivers, mountains, the shape of the land. Some of them do, most of them don't. A huge number of the borders you see on a world map today were drawn by colonial powers who had never been to those places, who were sitting in rooms in Europe, dividing up territory they'd claimed, drawing lines through lands they barely surveyed, splitting communities, ethnicities, trade routes, families, because it made the paperwork easier. And I want to be precise here, because the easy version of this story is a bunch of Europeans sat in one room and randomly drew every border with a ruler. It's not quite that simple. The more accurate version is, colonial powers created an entire legal system for claiming territory. They mapped lands for administrative control, not for human coherence. The maps made territory legible and enforceable, and the lines that got drawn through that process became the basis for modern states. There's a Durand Line, still one of the most contested borders in the world, drawn in 1893 by a British diplomat through territory he was negotiating over. There's the Sykes-Picot Agreement, 2 diplomats carving up the Middle East between France and Britain using maps and interests, with consequences that literally lasted into the modern era. There's Lesotho, an entire country completely surrounded by South Africa, not because that made any geographic sense, because the borders landed where they landed. There's Cabinda, a piece of Angola that's completely physically separated from the rest of Angola by another country, a colonial administrative artifact, now a legal fact. And here's the uncomfortable twist. This wasn't just something that happened and then got corrected. Most of these borders survived independence. When African countries started gaining independence in the late 1950s and 60s, there was an obvious question. What do we do about the borders? Because everyone knew they were arbitrary. Everyone knew they'd been drawn by colonial administrators who'd prioritize European interests over local human geography. Everyone knew that the lines often split ethnic groups, traditional territories, economic relationships, and the answer that emerged from the leaders of the newly independent African states themselves was, keep them. In 1964, the Organization of African Unity passed what became known as the Cairo Resolution. It effectively said respect the borders as they exist at independence. Not because those borders were good, not because they were logical, but because the alternative, trying to redraw them all, was going to cause more wars than just keeping the bad borders in place. The colonial map was frozen, not because it was right, because changing it felt more dangerous than living with it. Some of the borders you see on a map of Africa right now are there because the people who inherited them decided this flawed, arbitrary, externally imposed line is still better than the chaos of trying to replace it. That's not a fact about geography. That's a fact about power, and about what happens when a bad map gets taken seriously for long enough. Which brings me to the last piece of this. Because maps don't just distort reality and shape political reality, sometimes they straight up invent reality, and I mean that literally. For centuries, cartographers made errors. Islands that didn't exist showed up on maps because a ship's navigator made a measurement mistake, or misread their charts, or was just kind of guessing. Here's the problem. Once something appears on a map, people treat it as fact. Other map makers copy it. It gets reproduced. It gets cited. It gains a paper trail of authority. The Mountains of Kong, a completely fictional mountain range that cartographers drew across West Africa in the early 1800s. It appeared on major European atlases for nearly a century. Explorers planned routes around it, and it was entirely made up based on one traveler's mistaken interpretation of local descriptions. The island of California. For about 100 years, California appeared on European maps as an island, separated from North America. People used this map to make arguments about the region. It was wrong. Nobody corrected it for a century. Ermija, a possibly non-existent island that appeared on maps of the Gulf of Mexico, affected maritime boundary claims and potentially influenced oil politics before people started seriously questioning whether it was ever real. And then there's Sandy Island. Sandy Island appeared on maps of the Pacific between Australia and New Caledonia. It was in nautical charts. It was in official databases. It was in Google Earth. In 2012, a scientific ship sailed directly through where Sandy Island was supposed to be. There was no island. There was just water. Open ocean. The island had never existed, but it had been reproduced across maps and databases for so long that it achieved a kind of official reality. They had to sail through it to prove it wasn't there. And my personal favorite, Agloe, New York. A map publisher invented a fake town called Agloe as a copyright trap. If anyone copied their map, the fake town would show up in the copy and they'd have proof. People started using the map. They saw Agloe. They built a small store at the location. The store was called the Agloe General Store. The fake town became real enough that it ended up in other maps, legitimately, because there was now a store there. The map invented reality. And here's the thing. Digital maps didn't fix this problem. They inherited all the old errors, optimized everything for interface convenience, and then distributed one projection logic to literally billions of people through their phones. The lie didn't end. It scaled. At the start of this video, I said the world map you grew up with is mathematically incapable of telling you the truth. That's true. But here's the more interesting version of that. Every map is a tool built for a purpose, and that purpose leaves fingerprints. A projection can prioritize navigation over accurate size. A border can prioritize administrative convenience over human geography. A database can preserve a mistake until the world reorganizes itself around it. The map is powerful precisely because we forget it's a constructed argument. So next time you look at a world map, Pamidish, your phone, a classroom poster, Google Earth, just remember, someone made choices. And those choices shaped what you think the world looks like. Anyway, if this kind of thing breaks your brain in a fun way, subscribe because there's a lot more where this came from. Drop a comment with the thing that surprised you most. For me, it's still the Sandy Island thing. A ship sailed through it. I can't get over that. And if you want to stay in the rabbit hole, I did a whole video on the other stuff school got wrong. Not just maps, the tongue taste map, Columbus discovering America, the myth that blood is blue inside your body. A surprising amount of what you sat through for 12 years just wasn't true. It's called School Lied to You, and it's right there. I'll see you in that one.